The Espada are one of the most iconic group of villains within all of anime and manga, with each one of them representing a different aspect of death. This entire concept adds a lot of meaning to their character arcs as well as their abilities and how each of the Espada ended up at the end of the story. The Espada were given a number which had ranked the level of their raw power. This was spanning from numbers 1 to 9. As interesting as this is, I believe that the Espada's unique aspects of death are far more fascinating. In this video, I'll be uncovering all of the themes and symbolism which Kubo has incorporated into the different Espada, and how in some examples, the Espada's aspects of death had often foreshadowed their eventual downfall. What's particularly impressive is that Kubo had matched up each of the Espada against somebody who had challenged their specific aspect of death, and hopefully by the end of this video, you'll know why this wasn't just a coincidence. Also, be sure to stick around until the very end, as you'll know which of the Espada were originally based off of the 7 deadly sins, which is new information that Kubo had revealed on his official fan club Klub Outside just a few days ago. Also, I'll be revealing some details about the unrevealed aspects of death for both Neliel as well as Loopy. Hopefully you're going to have a better appreciation and understanding of the Espada, so without further delay, let's dive into each of their aspects of death. Before the video begins, only 20% of the people who actually watch my content are subscribed to the channel. If you enjoy these videos, then subscribe and stick around for more content just like this. Now let's get back to the topic of the video. In one of the most recent questions answered on Kubo's fan club Klub Outside, he was asked that the members of the Espada have changed multiple times, as the fan had wondered whether if Starrk, Ulquiorra, Szayelaporro and Aaroniero were replacements for other Espada. Kubo responds that the original Espada that he had conceived had only consisted of 7 members. He states that the Espada who can be attributed to these 7 deadly sins are the ones who have never been replaced. So I've done my best to link all of the 7 deadly sins to each of the Espada, and we'll start with the sin of gluttony, which is the most obvious, as I think this is attributed to Aaroniero. This is because he consumes other hollows in order to gain their abilities as well as memories, and this perfectly fits the sin of excess consumption. Then we have Szayelaporro, who I think fits the sin of lust, as he has a sadistic enjoyment of controlling others, as well as his obsession with perfection. And then you have the name of a Zombacto, which is La Ludiosa, which translates to the lustful. The sin of envy, I believe, is linked to Ulquiorra, as he constantly questions human emotions and he is obsessed with understanding the human heart, which I believe symbolizes that he has a deep envy for what he lacks when he hears Orihime speak of the heart. Now this one I'd struggled with linking to one of the Espada, but I think the sin of greed doesn't always have to be about material wealth, as individuals could have a greed for power or even dominance over others, and I believe that the Espada Nnoitra fits this sin because of his relentless obsession with proving himself as the strongest and never being satisfied with his own strength. Then you have Baraggan, the literal king of Hueco Mundo, as he despises the idea of being beneath anyone. His arrogance and belief in his superiority perfectly aligns with the sin of pride. The next deadly sin is wrath, and Yammy perfectly fits this, as his resurrection transforms him into a monstrous, rage-fueled beast. In his resurrection, he acts purely on instinct and anger, making him a textbook definition of wrath. Now the final deadly sin is sloth, and I think no other Espada fits this better than Starrk. His lazy personality and his reluctance to fight against individuals like Shunsui, despite them being incredibly powerful, makes him the perfect embodiment of the sin of sloth. So while initially Kubo had planned to base the Espada off of the 7 deadly sins, I think it's right that he had changed this up for aspects of death, because the 7 deadly sins has been played up so much within fiction, and it would have come across as being very generic, so I'm glad that this was changed in the end. So now that we know how the Espada were originally conceptualized with these 7 members with these 7 deadly sins, I think it's time that we now look at the 10 Espada that Kubo had created and the aspects of death that he had attributed to them. So we're starting with Yammy, who embodies rage as his aspect of death. Now this manifests uniquely within this character, as the angrier that he becomes, the more that his strength multiplies. Thanks to his aspect of death, it transforms him from the lowest ranking Espada to the fearsome 0 ranking Espada, as it highlights just how much of an effect that rage has on him. So while yes, he does have more power, the rage also diminishes his tactical judgment as well as his awareness in battle. The release command of his Zanpakuto is Be Enraged, as this highlights that his power isn't just enhanced by rage, his Zanpakuto release actually requires it. Yammy's defeat demonstrates the limitations of relying on rage as a source of power. While it can provide an incredible amount of strength, it lacks the refinement and control which is needed to engage with equally powerful opponents like Kinpachi and Byakuya. Aaroniero, the 9th ranking Espada, embodies greed as his aspect of death. This greed manifests through his insatiable hunger for power and evolution. He is the only Gillian class hollow amongst the Espada, and he possesses the unique ability to consume other hollows and permanently gain their powers, which grants him an endless amount of potential. By the time that we see him within the story, he had devoured over 33,000 hollows, absorbing not just their abilities but their very essence. Aaroniero's Zanpakuto is called Gluttonaria, which is a reference back to the 7 deadly sin which he was originally based off of. Aaroniero wasn't just content with taking the powers of Cayenne, which he had received after absorbing the Hollow Metastasia. Aaroniero had gone on to claim the entire identity, memories, and relationships of Cayenne in order to manipulate Rukia. Another fascinating aspect about Aaroniero is his weakness to sunlight, and it serves as a symbolic reminder that greed thrives in darkness, away from the illuminating light of truth. When Aaroniero is exposed to light, his powers can no longer function, and his true nature is revealed, which is a glass cylinder containing 2 floating heads. In the end, Aaroniero is a creature that is forever hungry, forever consuming, but will never truly be satisfied. Szayelaporro, the 8th ranking Espada, embodies madness as his aspect of death. This aspect of death is not channeled through mindless chaos, but through calculated insanity, from him being a deranged but brilliant scientist. With him possessing this aspect of death, it demonstrates just how thin the line is between genius and insanity. Szayelaporro has an obsession with perfection, as it drives him to conduct horrific experiments, even to the extent of modifying his own Fraction into consumable healing items. And he experiments on his Fraction to develop increasingly twisted ways to torture his opponents. He also has an ability where he creates voodoo dolls of his enemies as he crushes their internal organs one by one, as this highlights how a lot of his scientific discoveries are inspired by madness. Szayelaporro claims himself to be a perfect being, which in itself is insane. He's deluded himself into believing that he's achieved perfection through his ability called Gabriel, which enables him to be reborn from his opponent's bodies. His god complex, combined with his methodical approach to cruelty, creates a very chilling form of insanity. The ironic aspect of Szayelaporro's madness is how it ultimately leads to his downfall. His arrogant belief in his own perfection blinds him to the fact that Mayuri would be able to outsmart him. When he is then reborn within the body of Nemu, and he is subject to a drug which Mayuri uses to manipulate his perception of time, Szayelaporro ends up experiencing centuries of time dilation as Mayuri's sword slowly pierces his heart, as it shows him how his aspect of death comes full circle, as his mind, which is his greatest asset, ends up becoming the instrument of his excruciating torture. In the end, Szayelaporro was driven to insanity, and in his madness he was pleading to be killed. Zommari, the 7th ranking Espada, has intoxication as his aspect of death. This aspect of death is embodied by Zommari's unique ability to gain absolute control over his opponent, as this mirrors the way that intoxicants can dominate both the mind and body of its user. Zommari's resurrection, called Brujeria, which literally means witchcraft, grants him the power of Amor, allowing him to take control over anything that his eyes gaze upon. Just as intoxicants can gradually claim control over one's faculties, Zommari's eyes claim control over his opponent's body piece by piece. Zommari views himself as an agent of divine judgment, believing his control over others is righteous and just. This delusion mirrors how intoxication can often warp one's perception of reality as well as their self-importance. The interesting parallels don't just end there, as you have his meditative practices as well as his calm demeanor, which masks an obsessive need for control. This is similar to how addicts hide their addiction behind a facade of normalcy. Despite Zommari having 58 eyes capable of dominating his opponent, Zommari's power proves to be ineffective against Byakuya and his countless Zenbon petals. We then have the 6th ranking Espada, who embodies destruction as his aspect of death, and this is none other than Grimmjow Jagajak. Destruction is embodied within every facet of Grimmjow's character, from his fighting style to his nature as a hollow. Before becoming an Arrancar, Grimmjow existed as a panther-like Adhuchas class hollow, as he had led a small group of followers. Even during this time, he had a relentless pursuit for power through devouring others. His primal drive carried over when he had become the 6th ranking Espada, with him preferring an overwhelmingly offensive combat style rather than one relying on tactics and strategy. Grimmjow also embodies destruction in his actions and ideology. It's clear that he isn't fighting for the cause of Aizen out of loyalty, as he is fighting purely for the thrill of battle and breaking down his opponents. We see this through his obsessive rivalry with Ichigo, where his goal isn't just about victory, it's about complete domination. His Resurrection Pantera further reinforces his aspect of death, as when it's released he transforms into a panther form, which allows him to hunt and destroy his opponents. His signature ability Descaron literally tears apart space itself with oversized claws made up of energy. Grimmjow's aspect of death also gives him several flaws, like his self-destructive tendencies. His pride and rage often lead him to push himself beyond his limits, as he cares very little for his own well-being, as he is willing to go to any means in order to achieve victory. So in some ways, Grimmjow is the perfect embodiment of destruction, as he is an unstoppable force which consumes everything in its path, even potentially including himself. Nnoitra, the 5th ranking Espada, embodies despair as his aspect of death. Now this doesn't stem from his weakness, but a paradoxical relationship that he has with overwhelming strength and the loneliness that it brings. As the 5th ranking Espada, Nnoitra's relationship with despair is unique, as it's tied to his inability to find an opponent who is strong enough to give him the death that he craves. Nnoitra's aspect of death drives him to seek out increasingly dangerous battles as he hopes to finally meet a worthy opponent. His overall despair manifests in his obsession with proving himself against Neliel, the former 3rd ranking Espada. Their dynamic illustrates how his despair feeds into a cycle of violence, as the stronger that he becomes, the more desperate that he grows to find someone who is able to defeat him. Nnoitra's aspect of death is reflected perfectly in his final battle against Kenpachi. When Nnoitra finally meets an opponent who can grant him the warrior's death that he has always wanted, we see his despair transform into a kind of bitter satisfaction. Nnoitra falls in battle as the despair is lifted off of him, as he is finally able to rest in peace, having achieved the end that he has always wanted. Even his Resurrection Santa Teresa symbolizes this aspect of death through its multiple arms and scythe-like weapons, as he uses them to fight even more desperately against stronger opponents. Moving on to the 4th ranking Espada, Ulquiorra Cipher, who stands as one of the most philosophically complex Espada. He represents the aspect of death known as nihility. Ulquiorra was born within the depths of Hueco Mundo, and he had emerged from pure emptiness, surrounded by endless darkness with no purpose or meaning to his life. This formative experience has shaped his entire worldview, leading Ulquiorra to question the very existence of concepts that he cannot physically see. And this is in reference to the concept of the heart, which is explored via his dynamic with Orihime. Ulquiorra's nihilistic philosophy manifests within his combat style as well as his abilities. As far as we know, he was the only Espada who had a Segunda Etapa. Here he had embodied absolute nothingness and had given it a physical form. His signature attack, Cerro Oscuras, isn't just a black energy blast, it is a projection of a void of nothingness. Now the genius of Ulquiorra's character arc lies in how his aspect of death leads to his greatest revelation. During his final battle against Ichigo, he begins to understand what he previously had denied, which is the existence of the heart, a connection that is formed between two people which is beyond just physical matter. In Ulquiorra's final moments, he realizes what the heart is as he reaches out to Orihime, grasping at the very thing that he had always rejected. This serves as a perfect inversion to his aspect of death, and through his nihilism he was able to discover meaning as he ends up becoming one of the most memorable Espada in the entire series. So moving on to the third ranking Espada, we have Tia Harribel, who embodies sacrifice as her aspect of death. Now this resonates within every facet of her character as well as her leadership style. Unlike the other Espada who view their Fraction as expendable pawns, Harribel forms a profound bond with her Fraction, the Tres Bestias, as she doesn't treat them as subordinates but as valuable companions. Sacrifice is embodied within Harribel's character as she has an unwavering belief that true strength comes from protecting others rather than destroying them. This philosophy stands in contrast to the typical ruthless nature of Hollows and the other Espada. Harribel's aspect of death ultimately leads to her own downfall, as her loyalty to Aizen, which required sacrificing her independence and former life, ends up being rewarded with betrayal when Aizen cuts her down, as he deems her sacrifices to be worthless. This tragic turn of events shows us the double-edged nature of sacrifice as an aspect of death. While it can empower and unite, it can also leave one vulnerable to being exploited. We're moving on to the second ranking Espada, Baraggan, and before he had joined Aizen's army, he had ruled over Hueco Mundo as its king. Baraggan's aspect of death is old age or senescence, as it embodies the inevitable process of deterioration which consumes all life. Baraggan possesses an ability which allows him to accelerate the decay of anything within his proximity, and his Resurrection Arrogante transforms him into a representation of Father Time. Baraggan has a fatalistic worldview as he perceives existence as a continuous process of death. One of his most devastating abilities is Respira, where he releases a black and purple mist which accelerates aging, turning matter into decaying remnants. This power perfectly mirrors his fundamental belief that everything returns to dust regardless of its strength or complexity. Baraggan is defeated when Hachi uses Baraggan's principles against him, proving that even the self-proclaimed god of Hueco Mundo cannot escape the very mechanism of decay that he so proudly had used against others. Baraggan's character is a fascinating discussion on mortality, power, and the universal truth that time decays all. We finally reach the number 1 ranking Espada, Coyote Starrk, and his aspect of death is solitude. Stark's backstory reveals a hollow that is so overwhelmingly powerful that his spiritual pressure alone would destroy all of his companions, leaving him in a perpetual state of loneliness within the vast emptiness of Hueco Mundo. In order to overcome his loneliness, he eventually split his own soul into 2 distinctive entities, as he had created both himself and Lilynette, who were the 2 halves of a single being. This was his way of trying to escape the weight of absolute isolation. When Aizen had discovered Starrk, he had offered him a sense of belonging. For the first time, Starrk finds companions who could withstand his presence, as he had become the leader of the Espada effectively. They ended up becoming the closest thing that he had to a true family, and even in death, Stark's final moments are marked by his realization that he was never truly alone. Now we're moving on to 2 characters who actually didn't have aspects of death which were revealed within the manga, but later via comments that Kubo had made on his official fan club, as well as within the Can't Fear Unworld light novels, we learnt about each of their aspects of death. First we have Neliel. So according to question 553 answered by Kubo on his fan club, he had revealed that her aspect of death was the same as Harribel's, as aspects of death apparently correspond to the Espada number, so her aspect was sacrifice, but this does contradict Bleach Brave Souls, where it was revealed that Neliel's aspect of death is lamentation. When we recently got Neliel's character trailer for Bleach Rebirth of Souls, it was revealed that her aspect of death was sacrifice, which confirms the answer that Kubo had given on his fan club, and thus correcting this misconception conception from Bleach Brave Souls that lamentation is an aspect of death. Now, within Ryogo Narita's light novel Bleach Can't Be Your Own World, we learn about the aspect of death of Lupi, as it once again confirms that the Espada number is linked to the aspect of death of that individual. So when Lupi had become the 6th ranking Espada, it's because he had shared the same aspect of death as Grimmjow, which is destruction. So it seems like the aspects of death are linked to the 10 corresponding numbers within the Espada. I truly love the aspects of death, and I think that Kubo did a fantastic choice to go with these instead of the 7 deadly sins. It's no surprise why the Espada are one of the most fascinating villain groups in shonen anime and manga, as each of them have believable character arcs and they are written incredibly well thanks to the aspects of death that they each embody. So we have reached the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. What are your thoughts about each of the Espada's aspects of death? Was there anything new about the Espada that you learnt from this video? If there is anything that I've forgotten to mention, then continue the discussion in the comments. And lastly, thanks for making it to the end of this one, and I cannot wait to see you in my next Bleach Explained video.
A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you